Hey everybody, welcome to the Throwback Thursday GMG review. Today we're taking a look at Gorkamorka, a incredibly significant and yet often overlooked release from Games Workshop from the late 90s. Now this is a game that has, well, an interesting history. And if you want to read kind of where Games Workshop was at and what that means, I'm going to link a Goonhammer article that's a fantastically researched sort of like historical retrospective on the game itself. What I'm going to focus on is the actual gameplay and a Let's Play, which is also up today between me and Jay, because we haven't played it in a long time. And it's one of the few old 90s box game releases from Games Workshop we haven't done a series on. So Jay and I were kind of thinking like, what's a project that's something that would just be like relaxing we could do? And we got talking about Gorkamorka, so we made up some warbands and started playing the game again. And so I thought it would be appropriate to actually go through the rules and give you an overview of this game and where it sits design-wise versus more sort of like historically. But I do recommend that you listen to the We Just Played, where Jay and I talk about our experiences in the past. It's on Patreon, as well as reading that linked Goonhammer article, which goes over sort of the history of the game and where it's at. So, short story long about Gorkamorka. It was sort of like tentatively titled Orkworld or Necromunda 2 during the sales versus design studio pitch of the mid to late 90s. And it was a sort of two-player box set that came with some Battlefield accessories that ended up coming in the 3rd edition 40K box set. 2 new Orc vehicles, a war track and a truck, as well as a single made-to-purpose frame of Orc warriors that were customizable and specific for this game. And actually made it all the way, because they're pre-Brian Nelson Orcs, into the 3rd edition rulebook. Now, Brian Nelson did end up sculpting a lot of the medals for this, and that kind of came to define what orcs look like to this day. But these are sort of a bridge design in between the orcs of sort of like the goofier, brighter yesteryear of 2nd edition and Rogue Trader, and the more grim, lantern-jawed, sort of like barbarian warriors that we know today. This game also established a lot of orc lore, like their fungal reproduction, as well as painting an incredible picture about a planet called Gorkamorka. Well, it's actually a planet. Gorkamorka is the thing that's being built, that they're all going to ride back to the Great Wall in the sky. The planet's called Angelus, and a space hulk comes hurtling out of nowhere, crashes into a orbiting space station and explorer vessel of a bunch of humans who are just kind of investigating these cool, weird pyramids that are on Angelus, and hundreds and maybe thousands of years later, generations later, the humans have both devolved and started worshiping the orcs as muties and diggas, as well as the orcs themselves, who are just constantly trying to get this space hulk back on the road. And that's sort of the big sort of like setting for the game. Now, game-wise itself, it was of an era where you typically got multiple rulebooks in a box. This was a continuation of things like Necromunda. We had the rulebook and the campaign book, or the Underhive book. And this one, it's the rules into Overbook. And so this is all of your core rules for the game. This is all of your warband creation and campaign management stuff into Overbook. It was a handy sort of thing. I would have loved if this game had been more successful to get like a hardcover, like, like full stitched version. And as you can see, my copies are well loved. They're from the late 90s and are in kind of slightly grim condition, so I'm going to be fairly gentle with them. So here we have a picture of the box set itself. You got the old classic red whippy sticks, a 45-degree turn template. These Scorcha and Blast templates are actually cardboard versions of what would become the 3rd edition templates. So you can use the 3rd edition Flame template and the Blast template. It's a 5-inch Blast, and the same Flamer template that we used for up until 7th edition, basically, of Warhammer 40,000. Standard D6s, you still had to sustain fire dice, as this uses the core mechanics from 2nd edition 40K Necromunda, and the misfire and scatter dice as well. Like I said, Battlefield accessories, some cardboard tokens you'll see in the gameplay today, and then a mine entrance and a fort with a strap head that's used in various different places in the campaign system itself. You got 2 trucks, 2 war tracks, and I believe a grand total of 12 of the Orc Warriors. I think it was 6 and 6 in the frame. Oh, it says right here, 12 Orc Boys. There you go. I should look at the thing. So yeah, various counters. You had run counters, Overwatch counters, hide counters, and scrap counters. All your dice. And this used a very similar core mechanic to Warhammer 40,000 2nd edition, and specifically Necromunda. So you had a movement phase, shooting phase, hand-to-hand phase, and recovery. It was not an alternating game sequence. It was I go, you go. And it used the classic 40K stat line: movement, weapon skill, bliss skill, strength, toughness, initiative, strength, toughness, wounds, initiative, attacks, and leadership. And yeah, very little armor in this game because the orcs don't tend to wear armor. And it used a sort of standard mechanic of move or run, so basic movement or double movement with no shooting. You could charge with no pre-measurement. This was not a pre-measurement game. And then the usual rules for terrain. Open ground is open, half speed through difficult, very difficult is quarter speed, impassable you can't move through. You can jump anything 2 inches tall or less. Now, it used a very old style of shooting, which was also from Necromunda, the 90s Necromunda, where you had to shoot the closest target. You could ignore something closest to you if it was easier to hit. And the idea is you didn't have that much control over your troops. They would shoot the most threatening thing they could see. And this was in 40k second edition as well. You shot the closest thing that you could see, but you'd ignore something that was in cover for something that was easier to hit. And who could shoot you in a front 90-degree fire arc. So no shooting 360 either. Used hit mods, and the standard at the time, strength with an armor save modifier based on strength, short and long ranges with various bonuses to hit at those ranges, and a core maximum range too. This is actually still kind of going in the current generation of Necromunda, and although the to hit rolls are fixed, right, because they're fixed on your stat line, you can get bonuses and minuses and standards for deviation. You could roll 7s to hit, which means you needed a 6 followed by a 4, 5, or 6, depending on how hard it was. And it used the old wound chart, which was not a linear path, basically. And if it was equal to 4+, higher it was a 3+, lower it was a 5+. And then you need to get 2 higher than the toughness to wound on a 2, or to get to a 6. So it was like a stepped one, but it wasn't as simple as the metric of like equal, lower, higher, or double. You had injury rolls. Once you took a wound, if you rolled a 1 or a 2, you lost a weapon skill, ballistic skill. If that ever went to 0, you got taken out of action. 3 to 5, you're down. You crawled around during the recovery phase. At the end, you'd roll a dice to see if you came back or not. And then 6, you're out of action. It's relatively hard to take an orc out of action. Now, the one thing that was removed from regular Necromunda was the pinning rules, which means if you got shot, you would lay flat and you had to sacrifice your move to stand up. But grots and regular humans would still do it because they're not as tough as orcs. They don't keep their heads down the same way. Special rules like stick guns and how they would scatter, firing flamer templates. Now, it used the old second edition hand-to-hand combat rules where you had an attack dice pool. You would roll a number of dice equal to your attacks plus your weapon skill. So highest dice roll plus your weapon skill. For every 1 you rolled, it was a fumble. Your opponent gained +1 to their score. For every 6, in addition to your top 6 you rolled, you get +1 to your score. And then the comparative results are how many hits the winner did to the opponent. It's an old school system. I liked it. I thought it was really cool. You still had parries and stuff you could do as well. In this, you didn't have parries with swords because orcs don't bother with it, but they can block with their shields, which is sort of the same way, depending on the weapon that you were using. And you get bonuses for being higher, charging, or being over obstacles, or like charging into trucks and stuff like that. We forget that during our first game, where if you charge into a truck, you're always fighting behind an obstacle. So you get the charge bonus, but it's canceled out, and then every turn you're climbing over the truck. It's not easy to fight. Not that I think it super would have mattered, but it is relevant for our future games. Yeah, blocks, fumbles, and vehicles. And then this is where the game diverges drastically, and I think is where it shines. It has incredibly competent and modern vehicle rules. There's rules for like a basic gas movement, and then rules for thrusters. And thrusters have like a diminishing return of every time you use your thrusters. If it's a bike, for the first time it's free. You move 6 inches, then you move 6 inches again when you thrust. If you thrust and you want to go again, you have to roll a dive on a 1. You have to roll in the thruster damage chart because you're basically just pushing your engines harder and harder. And every time you roll, it's increasingly hard to thrust. So the first one's on a 2+, if you're a normal truck or a buggy. Second's on a 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you can keep rolling it and pushing it, then you're fine. You also can't turn when you thrust without making a leadership check because obviously their driver becomes far more important than actually keeping the vehicle under control. So it has interesting rules just dynamically for how you move around, but they get really interesting when you get into the rules for ramming and then the rules for tailing and racing. If you ever end nose to tail within 2 inches of an enemy vehicle, in its movement phase, every time it moves, you can try and move. And you can both make thrust moves until one of you gives up basically to stay like tailing somebody. Same thing if you're side by side with somebody moving the same direction within 2 inches, you can do the same thing. You can race them and try and stay like next to each other. So there's a really like simple but competent alternating activation where there's actually some friendly model movement in enemy turns, and this doesn't happen in 40k games at this point. Any of the 40k rule-based games, there's nothing like it in 2nd edition or in Necromunda, and it's a really cool breath of fresh air that the vehicles are moving dynamically with each other, and the drivers are actually interacting during both players' turns. You can also shoot when you're tailing somebody if you are still within 2 inches of the end of their movement phase and the start of the shooting phase, and you shoot before the people that are in the truck. Because the idea is that you've now managed to like pull ahead or pull behind them, and they're ducking your fire, which is really cool. There's some dynamic ramming rules for where and how you hit people. They can make leaders just trying to avoid you. You can rake and sideswipe people. And honestly, the vehicle rules and vehicle shooting rules are the best part of this game, I think. They were the key feature, and it's funny when you hear Andy Chambers talk about the retrospective. He had 8 weeks to write and playtest this entire game. He got the leg up of being able to import the Necromunda rules, but then an incredibly, I think, high quality, especially for the time, set of rules for the vehicle movement and the dynamic movement of vehicles, which puts them at center stage. You have to have enough, like in this game when you build your warband, I'll get that in a second when we get to the other book, but it's worth noting. You have to have enough space on your vehicles, and there's no rules for it. It's just how big do you want to build the standing platforms for your entire warband to stand, and that's your warband size cap. So as long as you have enough vehicles and Spanish to run those vehicles, then you can have as many models as you want, and that means that you had to be mobile. The whole idea is you're in an endless desert, and without the vehicles, your orcs are just going to like bleach out in the sun and die. And so the game needed the vehicles to be a key feature of its mechanical like resolution, and they really are. It has a really I think a quality vehicle movement system. Boarding actions, you had special dynamic rules for fighting vehicle onboard vehicles once you boarded them. And the same with stationary vehicles. So once you get into the last parts, you got things like you can hide, rules for explosives and psychology like stupidity, terror, and fear. This is all just standard 2nd edition 40k, so be familiar to any player at the time. Same with Overwatch and going Overwatch, and any special rules for like weapons. Now, this is the first time that the orcs get their own weapons too. And this is interesting because it does pull into 3rd edition 40k. Orcs aren't just carrying bolters. In every edition of 40k after this, a bolter was a generic term for like a mass reactive projectile firing weapon. In this one, they have shootas, which is a generic orc weapon that works because they believe it does. They have sluggas. They have 6-shootas. They have choppas and ooge choppas. And this is the first time that they have like their own unique orky weapons that don't operate just the same as like a human version of those weapons, and starts to set them in their own class. And come 3rd edition 40k, this is going to be the norm, and the orcs have their own types of weapons, and they've stepped away from everyone's just carrying a lasgun or a bolter or a plasma cannon or an autocannon. And it's kind of a unique and interesting way of looking at it. And the nice thing is, because of the way orc weapons look, it's fully backwards compatible with the entire like Rogue Trader orc range. A Rogue Trader orc with a bolter has just got a shooter. You know what I mean? If he's got like a bolt pistol, he's got a slugga. It just fully works. It's kind of ingenious, and it means that the weapons in this game can feel different and operate different, and 40k players wouldn't just go, yeah, that guy's got a bolter, he's got a stub pistol or auto pistol. And you can introduce crazy things like harpoon guns, rocket launchers, scorches instead of just having flamethrowers, heavy shooters and spear guns, and they can be a bit more barbaric, right? Have grab-a-sticks and stick bombs. The cool thing about the stick bombs is because they're big potato masher bombs, you can use them as an additional close combat weapon. So like if your guy's armed with stick bombs and a choppa, he's actually got 2 close combat weapons because he can like hit somebody with them. Yeah, use them as close combat. Obviously, there's some danger of the stick bomb going off when it's abused, but whatever. If both models roll 6 in the attack dice, when one of the models is using a stick bomb as a club, the stick bomb goes off, automatically hitting every model in the combat. So, I mean, just funny stuff like that. You can use nets and bolas, whips, and grab-a-sticks for the slavers. And then your armors are everything from like shields, studded armor, which is like it's like a basic flak armor. It doesn't use the blast bonus. Flak, which gets a blast bonus. And then heavy armor, which is a 4+ save. Now, gubbins is stuff you can put on your vehicles, and you had rules for extra stuff like extra armor plates, spikes, wrecker balls, grabbers, rams, boarding planks, lots of ammo. And every vehicle and its locations had special like results for the damage. And that's the last, but I think which is great about this is even with like the focus on the vehicles feeling like they like anything you saw in Mad Max Fury Road they could do, you also had anything that you could see happening when a vehicle is getting shot can happen with these tables. And you hit locations where like the crew can get hit, fixed weapons, any gubbins you bought could get hit, wheels and tracks could get hit, the driver, the engines, and different results based upon those penetrating hits could set off basically and have the vehicles go different ways. So even the damage feels unique. It had a handy quick reference chart, which I wish was in cardboard because I need to photocopy this and like zhuzh it up a little bit. And then we got into the other book. And the other book is great because it sets, again, I gave you a synopsis of the background, but this giant Space Hulk basically crashes into a human exploratory ship, creates untold carnage, and then generations later, everyone's living on this planet together, trying to build in Mechtown Gorkamorka, which is this giant idle spaceship thing that everyone's trying to earn a ticket to. As the mechs promise them they'll get to go back to the Wa. So it's interesting because it's an orc society that hasn't been taken over by a war boss. The mechs are this weird, like, and it's weird, like, when you think about it from, like, orc sort of sociology point of view, like, you think, like, one big orc would have taken over by now and just whipped the mechs into doing it. But the mechs are just kind of happy, and they've evolutionarily, like, now become in charge as, like, a council. So it's a weirdly socialist orc society, and the orcs are all bringing in more scrap to try and keep the mechs happy so they can all get back to the big Wa in the sky. It's like an orc society that's become stuck, basically. Now, at the back of it is Skid Row, so that's where the tail section broke off as the thing crashed down here. That's where the rebel Grots live. And then there's pyramids to the north, which is where all the Diggas live. And then to the south is Eter Vidya, which is the Eternal Vigilance, the ship that was the space station that was impacted against. And it's where the weird mutated remnants of the cult Mechanicus are trying to like piece back together society. You can see there's like a Necron head there and stuff too, because that's obviously something weird under the pyramids. So creating a mob, starting at you get 100 teeth. The 100 teeth let you buy your boys and your knob. You have to have a knob. You get a minimum of 3 warriors. For every vehicle or up to 3 bikes, you have to have a spanner. So I have 2 spanners on my starting list because I have a bike and a vehicle. A slaver if you want to take any grots and diggas. I didn't start with that because I couldn't afford it. Boys to crew your guns, drive your vehicles, and then youths are like the dudes who haven't toughened up yet. I'm using the old original Gorkamorka orcs as youths, and then new plastic orcs as my orcs, and I'll like level them up when they become boys. And you can also, if you have a slaver, you can have grots. Now, truck, buggy, track, and warbike, they're literally just names, and you don't have to, like, you can make them out of whatever you want, into whatever you want. I use the modern orc truck and warbikes just because, like, I'm making a video. I want you guys to be able to see something that looks like what you expect it to look like. But you could use any of the new Necromunda vehicles. You use the Gene Stealer cult vehicles. When I end up doing the Diggas as like an expansion, when we get to doing Diganob, which is the expansion for this game that came out about 6 months later, the Diggas are like these humans that were living underground during the nuclear fallout and so didn't mutate like the rest of the Cult Mechanicus guys did. And they worship the orcs because they think they're so cool because they have vehicles and they've taken over the planet. So they're all like pretending to be orcs. And the new like jackal bikes for the Gene Stealer cult, the Outcast minis from Necromunda are going to make perfect Diggas. I'm going to do like a Mad Max warband basically to go fight the orcs and have an extra warband. But there's also Rebel Grots and there's the Muties as well that add. So I think there's a total of 5 different styles of warbands because the orcs are either 2 types. They follow Gork or they follow Mork. Cunningly brutal or brutally cunning, and the other warbands come in later on. Then you buy them weapons. There's a huge chart of weapons you can buy, and then your job's good. So you have to have enough vehicles to carry everybody. Got to have a knob and at least 3 models, and at least 1 spanner because you're gonna have to have at least 1 vehicle. And then once you fill that up, you're ready to rock and roll. So for my warband started off with a knob. I have a truck and a bike. My bike's got a shooter and a guy with a chop on it. I have 2 spanners, so I have one that's like on foot basically fighting with the war boss, and I have one who's driving the truck to Cyclops. I got Pickle, who's his buddy, who's the guy who's the gunner. I got my other spanner. I have whose name is Turna. I have I said Gogs, who's the bike rider, and then I have like one boy named Knots, who's basically the other guy who can like ride around the back of the truck. So I have 7 models overall. 3 of them are vehicle operators. 4 of them are like actually walking around and doing stuff, and they all fit on the truck. The book had a great color section. You can see here it features all these orcs, and you can see what I mean. Like they're kind of in between that goofy looking orc and the current lantern jawed one. You can really see sort of like how they've come along, and when you see the expansions, you'll start to see just how different these guys begin to look. A lot of the conversions in here include other orc bits. Like there's a Brian Nelson orc, right? So you see that jaws extended. There's a Brian Nelson orc, an early Brian Nelson orc. I don't think that's a Brian Nelson orc though. None of these are. These are older miniatures, and you can tell the face is so different. But there's that Brian Nelson shaman who's been turned into orc slaver. And you can start to see that sort of like evolution where they've got the giant lantern jawed heads in these plastics. And there's some older orcs. You can see they got that more wide bite. It's a snake bite that's been put on those plastic legs. It even had rules for making like battlefield terrain, not rules, but like guides for doing that. And then look at these guys. Could you imagine in 8 weeks, Andy Chambers drafted all these guys, and they managed to put this game together. And there's some real legends in this picture. There's Ian Pickstock, Gav Thorpe, Adrian Woods. There's Andy Chambers right there. Mark Saunders and Andy Kettlewell are there. Andrew Sharman, Andy Banks, David Owen Meller, and Luca Mazzelli. Like, there's a real like rogues gallery of classic game design crew in there, and that's from the studio campaign. And there's other vehicles. So you can see like giant trucks that got made out of like, this is old Games Workshop. So there's an old battle wagon with different tires, but there's like just a truck or some kind of like World War II half track being bodged together with the current kits to make all these vehicles. And some conversion ideas. I like that they're crims. Cruxkull's crims. And then campaigns. Now campaigns, you're basically trying to get to 400 renown. You got the standard serious injury table with some orky additions like gobsmack, get your teeth knocked out. You actually get some money out of it, but you lose your leadership if you have less teeth. Impressive scars. You'll see what happens with impressive scars kick off. And then also you can get some permanent damage in your vehicles too when they get blown up as your mech or your span tries to fix them up. Standard experience table. This is, again, with just 2 types of Warband out of the core book, Gorkers and Orkers. You had two things. You had ferocity mostly on one, ferocity and muscle on one, and cunning and dakas on the other ones. And driving, sorry, cunning and driving. It was ferocity and muscle mostly on the Gorkers, and then cunning and driving on the Morkers. All your different skills. A lot of them are orc-based, like you have some special orky skills. Like you're a Rekka, or you have driving skills like you're a gun boy, or a fixer. Duck and weave, play dead, stunt driver on driving skills, emergency stop. So obviously the one thing Necromunda didn't have is driving skills because there's no vehicles. So this is a big addition that's different. And then the fort, and when you go back to the fort at the end of so basically the idea is that your warband every game, you've set up camp outside of Mech Town, you found like a rich like mine scene basically full of scrap, and you're mining it, and you're also defending this turf, looking for cool stuff in the area while all the boys are down there digging stuff out of the mine, and then taking it back to Mech Town every week or so to sell it to the mechs to try and buy your ticket onto Gorkamorka. And that's the life of the orcs in this thing. And all of the stories that unfold are based on that. Now, the one other thing this game did, I think even better than 90s Necromunda, is its post-game sequence. Because you go and visit the mechs. And that's the big kind of add-on here, is interacting with the mechs in the post-game is its own sort of little story, and it kind of harkens back to going to town in Warhammer Quest. It has a lot more in common with like going to town in the villages in Warhammer Quest than it does like Necromunda's trading post, where you're just kind of making rare rolls and seeing what's available, because you interact with them. Like for instance, the leadership challenge in Mech 10, the mechs will actually say what kind of fight you have to have. And when you go to like get things built up, you go to the mechs workshop and visit them, they'll have different like results. You don't automatically just level up your truck. You see what the mechs do, and they're fickle, and sometimes they screw up, sometimes they fix something that wasn't supposed to be fixed, and sometimes you try and get your gun made better and it just falls apart in your hands afterwards because the mechs suck. It creates a whole level of like story mode in the post game that is really fun. It makes you feel like you're in the setting, and everything can happen. Like you get your arm cut off and replaced with a claw arm or a hook arm. Your leg can get cut off. You get a peg leg or a tracks and wheels, right? Like, and you can just have your brain replaced with a squig by accident and start acting really different. If you get like a serious injury to your head and you want to get it replaced. So that I think is the magic of this game, is it has almost as much fun and engaging stuff happening in the post game as it does during the game. And because you have enough random chart activity, like on the damage tables for the vehicles, on the post game injury rolls, and on like going to visit the mechs workshops, it is a game that only has 2 warbands, but so much hilarity and chaos can ensue that everyone's warband is going to shape differently, almost by virtue of just how much crazy stuff can happen. And then playing the campaign, you're trying to get to 400 mob ratings so that you can retire and have the easy life. You get your ticket and you're waiting for Gorkamorka to take off. Game's full of scenarios. There's racing scenarios, looting, chasing each other. This one's probably my favorite because as you play this one, it has a rolling road where the scenery moves and your gas movements all the time, and you're boosting to move around. So you have to boost to try and move, and the rest of the time you're trying to keep up with each other. Has a siege scenario for fighting in your fort. You're trying to rescue one of your lads when you get captured, because people get captured all the time. And then you get some interesting sort of like history lessons, which are the transmissions from the surveying team on Angelus, and some like written stuff about the orcs themselves, because it does do like quite a bit to expand the orc universe. Get some orc names and glyphs. This is why whenever we get a name generator like Kill Team and stuff like that, I love it, because this makes me feel like I'm back in the 90s reading this. And then some design notes from Andy and Rick. And that's it. Gorkamorka. Now, we will also do a GMG review of the first expansion, which is called Diganob, which expands it with 3 new warbands, more background, more scenarios, and if I can get my hands on it, gubbins. This game only had one piece of afterlife, which was an anthology that collected all the White Dwarf and Citadel Journal articles about Gorkamorka called Gubbins. It was one issue from Fnatic Press, and the game was never supported again after that. So the lifespan of this entire game is 6 months. It came out in the fall, in the October big box for Christmas. It had 6 months worth of releases and White Dwarf support, leading up to and including Diganob in February of the following year. And then that was it. Gorkamorka was over. They put all the stuff from Journal and White Dwarf in this book called Gubbins, and the game disappeared. So I think it's super fun. It's worth exploring. And my opinion is, with the coolness of the orc miniatures of today, this game is even more worth playing, I think, now than it was even back then, because you can literally make anything. There's so many cool buggies, there's so many cool trucks and vehicles in the 40k range right now. If you are looking for a fun game to play, you can grab all the Gorkamorka rulebooks on the Vault section of Yak Tribe, which is a skirmish game sort of like compendium site. Great community with tons of inspirational photos and stuff like that as well. So I'll link that too. You can go check these games out. They are classic sort of like 40k. And if you judge them up with cool new models like Jan and I did, they can be an absolute, like, a hell of a lot of fun. In fact, everything we needed to play Gorkamorka, we'd already painted, because we painted the last couple Kill Team box sets. They come with like a fort and a mine strop head and like all that stuff. So yeah. So while on, and you can check out the Let's Play today. You can check out the podcast that is my Patreon exclusive podcast called We Just Played, which Jay and I did, which is I'll link again in the description. And until next time, I'm Ash. Have a good day. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continuing to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Death Ray Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.